Happy holidays from the Behind the Bells podcast.
Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. Here's a brief recap of what we covered in the last episode. I first brought up that given how many Santa Clauses we've seen, from the ones in the Santa Claus to Santa Claus the movie, that it was time to contemplate the side of faith. Not only did children ask all the time on whether Santa Claus was real, but how adults try to find that same sense on compassion. They too wonder if the spirit of Santa Claus is real. The work and effort that people put in for the holidays justifies the stress that we all feel and makes it harder to see if all that compassion even has any effect at all. The classic Miracle on 34th Street embodies a lot of the meta questions we all think about with faith. Can we declare that there is a Santa without any physical proof? I mentioned that the movie captures a different kind of America after the last war had ended. In addition to the new cultural changes, including the upcoming baby boom and suburban homes, these things are various things that Susan Walker wants for Christmas. Not toys or even clothes, the kind of home and family that was slowly becoming the status quo. The movie starts with our Kris Kringle walking through New York as he's making his way to watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, only to find the store's Santa drunk and incompetent. Their manager Doris ends up hiring Kris on the spot to be Santa in the parade, and also to be the one to meet and greet the children at the store. Kris makes for a fantastic Santa, carefully listening to children and helping parents get the toys that they have asked for, even if that meant sending them to a different store. And on top of that, after Susan visits with Kris and her previous notion of Santa not existing becomes challenged. This prompts Doris to find out that Kris genuinely believes he is the real Santa. The store official dismisses Doris's claims because they can realize they can actually make more money off of this kind of compassion. It ends up as a win-win for everyone. But not for the in-store psychologist, Dr. Sawyer. He views Kringle as a ticking time bomb, though much of his anger stemmed from his own stress and insecurity. Still, Kris goes on without much incident, continuously doing his job, giving Susan a new perspective on what to believe in, and making Macy's a happy camper. For a while. After a new friend has given quack information from Dr. Sawyer, this results in Kringle whacking him on the head with his cane. A small pop, but of course a guy like him is going to use this to justify his initial diagnosis. This results in Santa potentially being committed. This leads to the second half of the movie, the trial plot in which Kringle's roommate, Mr. Gailey, not only becomes his defense attorney, but has to prove in court on what someone has to do in order to be seen as the real Santa. Without a doubt, was Miracle on 34th Street a straight masterpiece. It's more than an adult parable that kids can watch. It's not just a movie about Santa Claus. It's really about the faith of kindness and understanding that the Christmas season is reminding us on what's really important. In fact, the movie was a well-orchestrated plot symphony that juggles a lot of themes like consumerism, innocence, opinions along with its overarching topic on faith, and so on and so forth. It's metaphysical and very smart without coming off as too pretentious. This is why I thought the movie had lasted with its consistent TV errands. It's easy for children to digest because one of the first major questions they do ask is whether Santa even exists. And weirdly enough, I even mentioned that I didn't see this movie until I was in college. This meant that I got the privilege to walk into the story without any rose-colored lenses of nostalgia. I showcased that in order to talk about the history of Miracle on 34th Street, I had to first talk about the man who would come up with the idea, Valentine Davies. He was born at the turn of the century under a very successful family that led to a very privileged childhood. This meant regular trips to the theater and his occasional secret trips to vaudeville shows. Though his father had hoped he would go into the family business, he would end up going to school in Michigan to fulfill the theater bug. His time in Michigan would range from writing in the local paper, in which it allowed him to see the latest theater shows and musical acts, to taking up a variety of drama courses. This is what led him to meet a new friend, George Seaton. The same guy would eventually become the future director of Miracle on 34th Street. While Seaton would continue his career as an actor, even becoming one of the very first to play the Lone Ranger on a radio series, Davies would drift towards writing. Once he would pursue a graduate degree from Yale, Davies and his wife returned to New York, where he managed to have a successful career as a playwright. The city ended up providing a lot of inspiration, especially with the Great Depression looming. It would be in the next decade, during the war, in which Davies would find his inspiration for Miracle. He was in Macy's trying to find a gift for his wife, where he took in the crazy shopping crowd, the herd that was drifting towards whatever deal was on sale, while ironically the place was decorated for the holidays. Noticing that families were still visiting the in-store Santa, that's when he asked himself, what would the real Santa think of all this? While Davies found his fame in theater, his friend Seaton was doing well in the newly booming movie business. He would first end up at MGM as a comedy writer. He didn't care much about writing comedies, but when assigned to the Marx Brothers on A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races, he at least got a great lesson on directing comedy, as well as writing for specific actors. Seaton ended up going from MGM to Paramount, and then to 20th Century Fox. It would be here where Seaton would get his big break when he wrote the script for the upcoming hit, The Song of Bernadette. So, how did all of this lead to getting Miracle on 34th Street made? How would they get Maureen O'Hara into the mix? How did they get Macy's to be okay with their portrayal? How was the movie still successful even with the summer release? And of course, why movies like Miracle, about faith, still hold up and are needed in the modern era? Let's step into the court and prove there really is a Santa Claus. This is part 2 of the Miracle on 34th Street story. Valentine Davies had a great idea for a Christmas story. His friend George Seaton was now one of the biggest writers in the industry thanks to his Oscar-nominated script for The Song of Bernadette. Davies knew that if he was ever going to crack into movies, he had to take this moment to get in touch with his former acting buddy. It would be sometime in early 1944 in which Davies would have a meeting with Seaton after writing to him. Seaton was already swamped with a variety of projects at Fox, but he felt that there was potential. This is where Davies told him to see what he can do with this. Seaton wasn't sure where to start. For one, Seaton was in LA while Davies was in New York. Davies had a better background with the New York shopping scene. Davies was able to walk over to Macy's whenever he wanted for more inspiration. But Seaton was in a better position to get any project he wanted rolling. Seaton initially went to 20th Century Fox because of his producer friend, William Perlberg. He had been promised by Perlberg that he would have more free reign, even more than at MGM, to write whatever he wanted. That was as long as he fulfilled occasional contract work. Seaton had just completed a script for a war drama, The Eve at St. Mark, and was about to start work on his directorial debut, a Betty Grable musical, Diamond Horseshoe, but he still told Davies that he'd like to be involved once a full story was complete. Davies was back in the military service, though that wouldn't last a lot longer. He would still draft out his story further, adding in Macy's into the story rather than coming up with an original story. He would also add in a psychologist as the source of conflict for the plot, and adding in a courtroom sequence to allow the script to go into a more metaphysical aspect of Santa. The more that he worked on it, the more that he felt that this was going to be a very important movie. He just had to hope that Seaton liked the story. He would finally hand his story off to Seaton while he was about to come home for another break, while the latter was premiering a new script for the Broadway stage, but not goodbye. From this point on, Seaton took more control in the story to adapt it into a script, while he wouldn't see Davis for another year when the war would finally end. Seaton would find himself very busy with work on the script, while working with his producer friend Perlberg on his first movie he directed, Diamond Horseshoe.
Nothing gives a meal completeness like that certain touch of sweetness. You'll be so delighted when you feast your eyes on our sweet menu. Would you like a dreamy cream puff or a lemon chiffon souffle? French pastries of every sort, a baked Alaska, a strawberry shortcake. How about a banana split?
That was Betty Gramble singing The Menu. The movie itself is a fun Golden Age musical I'd highly recommend if you haven't seen it. While it was only a small hit, given its high cost trying to emulate the MGM style, it was still a hit enough to continue giving Seaton more directing work. He would follow that with a romance comedy, Junior Miss, and would even reunite with Betty Gramble with another musical, Where Do We Go From Here? This was all at the same time when he was working on the Santa script, which at the moment was called Mr. Kringle. It's hard to say how much Seaton had added from Davies' story draft, as I couldn't find any documentation that could verify anything. What I was able to find was that it was Seaton's idea to open the movie with the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Along with it already considered by many Americans to be the true start of the holiday season, Seaton realized that unless you lived in New York, most people had never seen it before. Now we need to remember that before TV would become much more common in the next decade, the only way for non-New Yorkers to experience it was through the radio. This was a chance to make it much more nationwide. And again, this is all on the hope that Macy's would be okay with this. By the time in which Davies finally came home for good in 1945, he and Seaton got together to finish the script. The two may have been collaborating actor friends, but this was where they discovered at least one thing they couldn't agree on: the story's portrayal of Santa Claus. Davies wanted it to be much more blunt that Kris Kringle really was Santa. Seaton wanted to leave this much more ambiguous, giving us the possibility that this Santa was nothing more than a nice guy. Davies didn't want Santa to be inconclusive, making children in the audience disappointed. Seaton reassured him that there wouldn't be a definitive answer. Plus, he wanted to ensure that the story's theme of faith would carry over, in which the audience would simply have to digest in good conscience that the man that they've come to love really was Santa. Davies eventually realized that Seaton was right. What would be the point of faith if we were given a simple yes or no at the end? Now that the script was ready in a first draft, Seaton got back into contact with his producer William Perlberg to make the pitch. He loved it. He felt that audiences were ready for a much more sophisticated Santa Claus story. The problem was that they still needed the approval of Fox's studio head, Darryl Zanuck. So Seaton, Davies, and Perlberg got a meeting in to pitch the script, now called It's Only Human. He didn't like it. He was convinced that unless the movie was going to be a major musical, that they wouldn't come for a Santa Claus story, going as far to call the project unimportant. That was a disappointment for Davies to hear. The two would take the project to MGM, Columbia, and Paramount to see if they wanted in which they didn't. In fact, in early 1946, they went back to Fox to pitch it again. Zanuck was still not sold, feeling that the movie was nowhere close to their higher-end A films, even if it was intended for families. but didn't see it as a cheaper B movie either. The script was just not up to the same par as other family hits like the Flicka series or that of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical State Fair. Eventually, the movie would finally get greenlit once Seaton was able to convince Zanuck that the movie would be made as a smaller B picture with a lower budget of $630,000, which was exactly what he had secretly needed to make the picture he wanted. The folks at 20th Century didn't know that, but both writers felt it was better simply to make the movie and prove them that it would be worthy. The other condition that they needed was the permission of both Macys and Gimbels. The duo had gone far as to have notes set aside to rewrite the movie to create their own fictional stores. But in order to establish a better sense of having blind faith in an ever-increasing cynical world, it made better sense to have real name brands. Seaton and Perlberg set up meetings with both Jack Strauss, the CEO of Macy's, and Bernard Gimbel, the CEO of Gimbels, to hopefully get the permission to use both names within the film. They were both given scripts, and then they were shown that the story wouldn't attempt to portray either store as better than the other. Since the two had been competitors, they would do this very public display of price wars just to see who could undersell the other side. They would also set in their own methods of advertising, especially around the holidays. Macy's had their name all over the famous Thanksgiving Day parade, while Gimbels used to have their own in Philadelphia. Macy's set itself as the more high-end brand, while Gimbels focused on the middle class. But both had famous city stores in New York, and both did major business. What helped was that even with the competition, CEOs Jack Strauss and Bernard Gimbel were friends that knew a quote-unquote war was simply good publicity, but neither wanted to appear as the bad guy. After both meetings took place, the company's legal teams made sure that the scripts didn't put either in a negative light. A settlement was reached. The movie would be shot first, and both companies got final say on the finished product. While the folks at Fox were worried that this could cost them a slight loss, George Seaton felt that as long as the script was shot word for word, there would never be a major issue. The issue, though, would be to find the right three people for the big parts: Kris Kringle, Doris, and Susan. Like how a lot of studios worked during this time period, the cast would be found through their contract players. Kris Kringle would be played by English character actor Edmund Gwen. He was a classically trained actor who had performed in several stage shows in England before jumping into film acting just before he turned 40. He'd shown a lot of range, going from a comedic satire on the American film industry in The Real Thing at Last, one of Alfred Hitchcock's first movies, with The Skin Game, an early horror thriller with then unknown Boris Karloff in The Walking Dead, not the zombie show, and even returning to the world of Hitchcock in the 1940s, The Foreign Correspondent. He always gave each role with grace and charm. Here's a clip of him playing Mr. Bennet in an adaptation in Pride and Prejudice.
Young man of large fortune, and he's single, my dear. Think of it. Oh, what a fine thing for our girls.
Is it?
Mr. Bennet, you know perfectly well what I mean. I'm thinking of his marrying one of our daughters.
Oh. Is that his design in settling here?
How can you talk so, Mr. Bennet? This is a serious matter. You must go and visit him at once.
You and the girls go. Or better still, send the girls by themselves. But you're as handsome as any of them. And Mr. Bingley may like you best of all.
Oh, my dear, you flatter me. When a woman...
It was said that this movie and his role in Lassie Come Home were what convinced George Seaton that his persona would make for a great Santa Claus. By this time, Edmund Gwen had already fully settled in Hollywood, living at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, now that he was getting constant work as a charming old man. Now he just had to play the role once more in a Santa suit. For the role of Doris Walker, they knew that they needed a strong actress to play a hard-willed character. Fox had the perfect actress already under contract, Maureen O'Hara. What's ironic that the spite in which Miracle would eventually become a Christmas classic The Irish-born actress initially didn't want to do the movie. Maureen had become one of the biggest stars within the 40s thanks to roles such as in a pirate adventure, The Black Swan, a Western biopic, Buffalo Bill, and a period piece romance, The Spanish Main. These roles helped her become known as the Queen of Technicolor, but found herself frustrated with the Hollywood lifestyle and thus returned to Ireland for the first time since the war had ended. She was finally able to see her family, but only after a week, she was called back to New York to fulfill a contract role. Yes, she already had a contract that made her a studio player, but this separate contract was different. You see, much earlier in her career, despite having some impressive work in her resume, including a Hitchcock movie, Jamaica Inn, and an RKO adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, she was not the Maureen O'Hara she would be later. She was still a young 20-something and trying to make her way within the Hollywood system. She ended up catching the eye of film director John Ford, who was casting his upcoming adaptation of the novel, How Green Was My Valley.
Mr. Griffith, I couldn't let you go without thanking you.
It was only my duty, girl.
No, it was more than duty.
Yes, Hugh's a fine boy. And you're a fine family. You better be going in now, you'll catch your death.
Yes. Will you be coming to supper soon?
Yes, later, when you're finished with doctors and such, huh?
I will hurry them away then.
Good.
The story of a Welsh coal mining family in the Victorian era was perfect for O'Hara, and John Ford knew it. Even though Katharine Hepburn was nearly given the part, Foxhead Zanuck loved her previous performances and worked out with RKO to purchase her contract. He had also set her up in which by fulfilling this role, she'd have to make at least one film that was by the choice of the studio. Why was that condition set up? I honestly wish I knew. But back to 1946. Maureen O'Hara arrived in New York in a bad mood, knowing she was going to have to do whatever random project Fox was going to put her in. This mood wouldn't last when they gave her the script to the now titled Miracle on Herald Square. I should point out that it went through multiple titles because the PGA, the Producers Guild of America, kept demanding the changes. It would only take 30 pages in for her to change her mind. This was no small character. This was a strong mother character who worked hard. This was a woman who would go through a Christmas evolution. This was a great character, and by the time she had finished reading the script, O'Hara was more than happy to do the movie. But what about Susan? Fox already had a perfect young actress for the part, Natalie Wood. Miss Wood wasn't even 8 years old when she was casted, but already had an extraordinary resume. She had finished an Orson Welles and Claudette Colbert romance, Tomorrow is Forever, where Welles himself said this about her, to quote, "So good. She was terrifying." Unquote. She was even already set to start an English ghost story, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, where Wood was talented enough in which she even played a British child. Along with doing a flawless accent, she was also said to have had a photographic memory. She could memorize nearly up to 10 pages of dialogue and be ready within the next day. Her performance helped speed up the shooting of these movies, and Fox loved that they could keep things moving fast. According to Wood's sister Lana, what helped Natalie was that unlike someone like Shirley Temple, who was great at playing herself, Natalie had more of an ability to play a character. That's not to diss Mrs. Temple at all, but if anything, since the roles that Shirley Temple landed were essentially Pollyanna-type characters in which she would warm the hearts of cold people, Natalie Wood's part in Miracle would be a reversal of that, in which the adults had to help warm the heart of this all-too-adult child. This meant that Natalie was going to have a busy schedule as she'd be shooting Miracle while filming her scenes for The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. So that meant her having to practically memorize 2 scripts, and even a third one. Yes, she would end up being cast in Scudda Who's Scudda Hey. She would have to do this movie right after Miracle, and this was while she was still going to school on the 20th Century Fox lot. And yet, despite all the work she went through, she was more than happy to play these parts. The rest of the cast will be filled out by Fox contract stars. John Payne for Fred Gailey, Gene Lockhart for Judge Harper, Porter Hall for Dr. Sawyer, and so on and so forth. George Seaton and Valentine Davies had made their final revisions on the script, which included a cut explanation in which Doris's ex-husband was an alcoholic in order to make the divorce reason much more ambiguous and therefore more relatable. They had also settled on Miracle on 34th Street as the final title. But now they had to get to New York as soon as possible in order to begin. It was November and Fox had made an arrangement with Macy's to let them film the actual Thanksgiving Day parade for the film. We're going to take a short break, but we'll go into how that would go along with the rest of the production.
Do you like podcasts about Christmas?
Uh-huh.
Do you like podcasts about movies?
Uh-huh.
Well, we have a podcast for you.
I'm intrigued.
I'm John.
And I'm Ben, and we're the hosts of Santa by the Minute,
the only podcast that breaks down 1985's Santa Claus the movie 1 minute at a time.
The holiday classic starring John Lithgow.
It certainly should be.
Dudley Moore.
Isn't it self-explanatory? I'm an elf.
An elf?
Yes.
And David Huddleston.
Hold on tight, and don't worry. You'll be as safe here as you are in your own home.
You won't want to miss as Ben and I talk about 1 minute of the movie every single week.
Stop! Are you insane?
We post a brand new episode every Wednesday, and every episode is...
for free!
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
Bigger and better than ever before, New York's Christmas parade hits Broadway, and these monsters filled with helium look as if they're going to hit the ceiling. Colored floats and pretty girls by the dozen remind New Yorkers about the number of shopping days in hand, and even the Lion looks quite happy about the Christmas joint. Yes, it's mile after mile of fun and frolic, and with all those gas bags around, there's no telling what a small boy with a pin couldn't do. Anyway, the star of the show's here to see fair play and to tell the folks it won't be long now.
One of the biggest sequences that needed to be shot was the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which meant that in addition to the actors filming the scenes involving the drunken Santa and Doris introduction, would utilize the actual parade happening that day. The balloons would be filmed, the performers would be filmed, and even the audience would be filmed. The people that came out to see the show was very excited, knowing that more people were about to find out about the parade. This wasn't to say that the parade wasn't famous, but again, keep in mind that in the days before television, unless you were local to the New York vicinity, the only way you got to experience it was through radio. And that's if you were even in a house that got the broadcast. On top of that, George Seaton was still finishing the final draft and was under a lot of pressure to scrap the shooting of the parade. One might think that cutting this famous part would have been dumb, but we need to remember that Miracle was still a small-scale movie for Fox. They were lucky to have even gotten permission to film in New York at all. Thankfully, Seaton was able to defer part of his directing salary in order to pay for the production days. He had also had several cameras set up to ensure that every angle would be captured. They would shoot the whole thing, use what they need for the movie, and use the rest for potential promotional material. So what would end up in the final movie really did happen at that parade. Even Edmund Gwen rode in the parade as Santa and made the announcement for the start of the Christmas season for Macy's. But was it completely merry? Not for Edmund Gwen or Maureen O'Hara, who recalled that Thanksgiving as being very cold. The city hadn't had a major snowfall yet, but the air was a crispy low 40 degrees. And again, this was while they needed to ensure that the parade went smoothly. If anything, Gwen and O'Hara envied Natalie Wood and John Payne because they weren't involved in any of the parade scenes, so they got to stay inside and watch from the warmth of their own hotel rooms. Even in mid-December, when they went out to Long Island to shoot the exteriors for Susan's dream house, the weather never let up at any point. According to O'Hara's autobiography, she said that it got so cold that day that the cameras ended up freezing. A kind neighbor from across the street allowed the cast and crew to get themselves warm while unfreezing the cameras by the fire. I'll point out that the house itself is still standing today, looking very close to how it appeared in the movie. Despite the cold weather, the cast still found themselves having fun in New York. It was even rumored that on plenty of off nights, if they weren't seeing any Broadway shows, Maureen O'Hara, John Payne, and Edmund Gwen would explore the Christmas side of the city, skating in Rockefeller Plaza, or window shopping on Fifth Avenue, or even viewing the various Christmas displays. No one was really ever bored, even for young Natalie Wood. Wood found the shooting in the city more exciting than anything. She never had too much concern over memorizing her material, so she would do her best to be a good actor and act as everyone's cheerleader. She and Maureen had a close friendship that mirrored the mother-daughter dynamic from the movie. Maureen wanted to ensure that she remained professional, but not too much of one. She herself had a child already and knew how hard it was for Natalie to be away from her home. She was also using this production to get away from her alcoholic husband. So her attention on Miss Wood would become a friendship that would last for the rest of their lives. While using the city to get their needed shots, including that of Madison Avenue when Chris is making his long walk to the parade, the Macy's store itself was fully utilized. Yes, they would use the employee locker room, cafeteria, and even part of the Santa Lane display. They were given floors 7, 8, and 13, where along with capturing the occasional crowd shot, they would shoot at night when they needed a lot less noise. Working nights didn't bother Miss Wood, who absolutely loved being able to have the store to herself. She and O'Hara would even bond by wandering around together, trying on some of the clothes, and sampling the products. Edmund Gwen also got into it as he loved playing Santa. Even during rehearsals, he really came to enjoy playing a magical gift giver and hearing from the other child actors what they wanted for Christmas. I should note that in order to maintain accuracy, all the child actors, including Natalie Wood, were told that he was the real Santa. She fully believed him, especially when he improvised his reaction to the beard pulling scene. This was another reason why the shoot was considered by Wood as one of her favorite movies to make. Who wouldn't want to make a movie with the real Santa? This mantra would continue until a cast party in which she would see Gwen out of costume and find out he wasn't actually Santa. But that didn't stop her from loving him. He was like a fun grandpa to her. But that's what everybody else said about him as well. Maureen O'Hara had always called him very charming and funny. Perhaps there was a part of her that made her believe that he could just be the real Santa after all. By mid-December, they had finished shooting in New York. After a long Christmas break, they would all return to Los Angeles to film the rest of the movie at the 20th Century Fox Studios lot. Sound stages 3 and 6 would be used to shoot Santa's throne at Macy's, part of Doris's apartment, the courthouse, and a variety of offices. Like I said before, this is when things got very busy for Miss Wood, who was doing The Ghost and Mrs. Muir in the morning, School in the early afternoon, and Miracle in the late afternoon to early evening. That was a lot for an 8-year-old, and yet she still called the whole thing fun. She had said multiple times that she had considered acting as a more advanced form of Let's Pretend. It was just easier for her to know what to do as long as she treated it more like professional play. Even as things started to wind down when The Ghost and Mrs. Muir would finish its production, she had already had her Scud-a-Doo musical next. She would remain with the Miracle until late February when all of her scenes were finished. If there was anyone who admired what she did, it was their studio head, Zanuck. He would even reward her with a 2-picture contract after Miracle was released. Once the rest of the actors got their scenes shot, The filming was completed on March 24th, 1947. Now they were going to have a small window, less than 3 months, to finish it. One thing that was another source of disagreement between the studio and George Seaton and Valentine Davies was that of the release date. You think that a holiday release would be set in stone for something like Miracle, but that didn't make sense to those at 20th Century Fox. Seaton had his heart on releasing the movie on Thanksgiving, but Fox said no. Their rationale was that with any holiday release, even if you were to put it out at the beginning of November, it would have a very short time in theaters. Modern day Christmas movies get about the same time, but it was very different in the pre-multiplex era. You see, the bigger the movie was in the 40s, the longer it would play. There was no home video release, so if anyone missed a movie, then they missed it. The more popular a movie was, the longer it would play. It was uncommon for many of these movies to play for half a year, maybe even longer. The dailies of the movie that had been sent to Fox during the shooting had impressed them, and they started to think that the movie wouldn't be small at all. So they insisted on a summer release. The premiere would in fact be set for June 3rd. You think that this would put their post-production into a frenzy, but Seaton definitely knew what he was doing. The filming had gone well enough that no reshoots were required. He had already been in talks with Fox editor Robert Simpson, who had also loved the dailies. He essentially had to put it all together as instructed by the script, so really no issue there. Cyril Mockridge, a British musician now and studio composer who would also work consistently with the famous Alfred Newman, was working away on the film's score. He had been instructed to use more of a melody of Christmas carols than a more original score. To its credit, it's still effective. It still captures a very nostalgic feel for the holidays, even if it's more of a standard score. Here's an example of a melody that was made specifically for the parade. Again, this is before music became a larger factor in the Thanksgiving Day parade, so for many people, this would be the first kind of music from this annual show. I can't say that the movie had no issues behind the scenes at all, but it is so far maybe the smoothest production that I've covered so far. There didn't seem to be any mishaps, cast disagreements, or anything like that. It was something where everything went right in order to finish it on schedule. It didn't have a ton of pressure, or at least not in the beginning. Fox made it clear that with its set release date in the summer, it had the potential to play all year before finishing by the time the holidays had ended. Fox did know that by putting a Christmas movie out in June, it was going to be a hard sell. I mean, who was going to go eat some ice cream on a hot day, go to the beach, and then catch a Christmas movie in the middle of summer? Okay, I would, and if you do live below the southern hemisphere, you're the exception. Even if they did market it as a Christmas film, it would have been a hard film to market for adults. So, along with a summer release, the marketing was told that none of the posters nor the trailer could give away that it was a Christmas movie. How are they going to pull that off if the story is about Santa? Well, it's better if I play the audio so that, well, you can actually believe me.
That's no good. Turn it off. Stop it. Turn it off. That won't work. It's no good. What do you make a trailer for? To give the public an idea of what kind of a picture to expect.
But, boss, we...
Hilarious, romantic, tender, exciting. Make up your minds. It can't be all of those things.
Mr. Shape, if you'd look at the picture...
I don't have to look at the picture. I know you're wrong. Tender, exciting. Why, they're practically opposites. You've got to decide what kind of a picture this is. Is it a romantic love story? Is it an exciting thriller? Is it a hilarious comedy? Make up your minds. Now go to work and fix it up.
Yes, that was the one trailer they put out for Miracle. It only contained 2 clips that don't show anything Christmas. Even the musical score was changed so that the bells were removed. That way, it didn't even hint of anything Christmassy. It was just the studio executives and some contract actors talking about how it's the greatest movie ever. It's very forced and counterproductive by not saying anything, but it is an oddly effective way to make people find out on what makes it exciting and groovy. It was made in which Miracle on 34th Street would have its first test screenings in LA, Pomona, and Riverside. The audiences all found it unanimously great. They loved the story, acting, humor, and of course, Christmas spirit by the end that was encouraged. This only proved Fox's point that it would need as much time as possible to stay in theaters. The last thing that they wanted was to overhype the project, which is ironic given the trailer, so except for the poster, not much marketing was even done for the earliest releases. The later releases at the end of the year would be different, but we'll get to that soon. Oh, and what about Macys and Gimbels? Their CEO saw the movie at one of the test screenings and knew that the movie was going to be a hit. Neither had any qualms and each gave a pass. They saw that the movie was going to change the image of mall Santas forever. In fact, Macy's even closed up their store one day so that all their employees in New York City could watch the movie for free. On schedule for June 3rd, 1947, Miracle on 34th Street would premiere at the Roxy Theater in New York City. It was a lavish affair at one of the country's largest movie palaces, and it didn't give away much of the premise still. Critical reviews were even held off until the first releases in other New York City theaters and in LA. It didn't take long for the critics to not only proclaim Miracle as one of the best Christmas movies of all time, but potentially one of the best movies of 1947. Kate Cameron of the Daily News said, "On the screen is Miracle on 34th Street, one of the sweetest stories ever turned out by Hollywood. It is light, it is charming, it is delightfully funny, and completely captivating." Bosley Crowther of the New York Times held high regard for Edmund Gwen by writing, "They got the real Edmund Gwen to play Kris Kringle with such natural and warm benevolence that if ever the real Santa wants to step down, Gwen is the man for the job." Probably one of the funniest reviews came from Variety, where their critic, I couldn't find a name, had this to say about Natalie Wood. "Surprise Muppet performance is torn in by Natalie Wood as O'Hara's non-believing daughter, who finally accepts sanity. It's a standout, natural performance." Okay, I had to do the accent because it sounds like the guy wanted to phrase it while writing the entire thing in 10 seconds. Miracle would have a rolled out release, which meant that it would go out to major cities first before coming to other small town theaters. It would turn out that this would be the best way to both keep the film's Christmas setting a secret and to make it a hit. The film would end up being a very big hit for Fox. With each passing week, more families would hear about the little Christmas movie that was playing in the summer, so it did turn out that these families, and eventually everyone else, were willing to get their summer ice cream, were willing to go to the beach, and even willing to go see this amazing movie about finding one's childhood and restoring their faith. Many theaters even started to decorate their lobbies once the word got out that Miracle was a Christmas movie. Some even went as far as getting Christmas trees up, which meant either managing to find any kind of trees in the summer or settling with a faux tree. It would play all over summer and well into the fall and winter time frame. This would make it such a hit that department stores started to take advantage of the movie by marketing deals that were themed. Now, while this was going against the movie's moral, that was just business taking advantage of that sort of thing. Department store greed was always going to stay regardless of a great movie. Miracle became so popular that many theaters would choose to make this a first run, making this, well, the only choice for some people. Fox's theory proved correct, and by the time the film closed in late December of 1947, they had had one of the most talked about movies of the year. It managed to gross well over $2 million, which seems minuscule by today's standards. Again, it was made on a low budget, and as much as I'd like to disclose its full numbers, I really couldn't find much other than seeing that it didn't gross enough to make the top 10 list. But it would receive something that not a ton of Christmas movies have the honor of: Oscars.
Now I know there's a Santa Claus. Oh, you may laugh, ladies and gentlemen. It's not so easy to be certain, you know. He's a most elusive little fella. Turns up in all sorts of places under all sorts of names and disguises. First time I ever met him, he told me his name was George Seaton. And wonderfully, George Seaton had his revenge by bringing him to life. About a year and a half ago, he suddenly turned up at Culver City and told me his name was Metro Goldwyn Mayer. That was the day Metro agreed to loan me to Fox to make the picture. And now, I think it's time Santa Claus added a word to his name. I think he ought to call himself Santa Claus Incorporated. Santa Claus Inc. Inc. For then it will embrace all you wonderful, wonderful, kind people who have done me the honor of making me stand here tonight. Thank you, all of you, for making the evening of my life such a happy one. Thank you.
That was Edmund Gwen picking up his Best Supporting Actor Oscar, which, as of 2022, remains the only Academy Award for ever playing Santa Claus. Valentine Davies would also win an Oscar for writing the story, as did George Seaton for the screenplay. The movie was also nominated for Best Picture, and even found itself competing another great Christmas movie, The Bishop's Wife. They would both lose to another great movie, Gentleman's Agreement, the Gregory Peck drama about a writer who becomes witness to the bigotry Jewish people had gone through. But this made a good night for Valentine Davies, who could finally say they had successfully broken into the Hollywood crowd. He can now write the movies he wanted to make. He even had one of his other screenplays that was already being adapted, a young romance movie called You Were Meant for Me. Davies and Seaton would collaborate again in a few more years on a family-centered dramedy, Chicken Every Sunday. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say if it's any good, but to go from a large story on faith to a small comedy about a boarding house seems like a jarring step. The two would remain friends for the rest of their life. It just seemed like that they knew that they already struck lightning once and probably wouldn't happen again. They would work together one last time in 1954 with The Bridges of Toko Reed. Davies would go on to write a variety of movies, including a baseball story, It Happens Every Spring, a biography with The Glenn Miller Story, and even got the chance at the director's chair with another biopic, The Benny Goodman Story. He would even serve as the president of the Screenwriters Guild from 1949 through 1950. He continued to work in film and television until he died in 1961. George Seaton would continue his career as a writer, producer, and director, with tons of credits including one of Clark Gable's last hits, Teacher's Pet, a really funny movie about a mental outbreak, What's So Bad About Feeling Good, and even a disaster thriller with the 1970 classic, Airport. He always said that out of everything, Miracle was his favorite and had the best legacy out of the bunch. He was right. Miracle on 34th Street would end up being remade for radio many times, a TV movie in 1955, another in 1959, and another in 1973, in which Sebastian Cabot, the narrator from the older Winnie the Pooh movies, played Kris Kringle. Miracle would even get a Broadway adaptation written by Meredith Willson, the same guy behind The Music Man. It opened in 1963, once again retitled Here's Love, where it ran for less than a year. Oh, and the remake from 1994 with Richard Attenborough and Mara Wilson? Of course we'll address that, but that itself is worthy of its own deep dive, so stick around and we'll definitely cover that movie at some point. Miracle on 34th Street still holds as one of the great movies about faith. And it doesn't surprise me with how many people in the modern era still pop this on. I think people not only feel amazing after watching this, but it makes them consider just what is faith. Faith in their religion, their country, their work, their family, or maybe even their loved ones. Faith and belief are things that we think about all the time, and Miracle knew where to touch upon these themes. These kind of movies are a dime a dozen, and are severely needed because, like with any kind of art form, cinema is an emotional experience. You don't just walk away thinking you just met a nice guy who said he was Santa. No, he proved himself as Santa, pleading his case without any evidence. As much as the 2020s have made large tech strides and have been able to debunk some of the greatest mysteries, not everything has been explained, nor it should. Our goal with any kind of faith is that we're putting our highest emotions with the people or things that we trust the most. Mom will be there for you. Your teacher will help you learn. Santa Claus helps you stay motivated to be a good person. Faith in Santa Claus is not the easiest to explain. But if that means that I want to be a good person to spread love and joy year-round without the requirement of Christmas year-long, then I believe in Santa. Santa Claus encourages the best out of everyone, and if he can come to us once a year to listen and give, then we, in return, need to believe and be the best people we can.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.